So I'm going to take us through some principles of learning and memory from a neuroscience perspective today. I don't imagine loads of it is going to be brand new to you in terms of the takeaways for teachers, but what I'm hoping it will do is help to strengthen your mental model around why you might want to do some of those things. So just for clarity about neuroscience, neuroscience can't really tell teachers and educators and leaders what to do. It's too much of a jump from the brain to the lesson. And I think the nicest phrase that I've heard for this is you can't jump from brain scan to lesson plan, which you'll appreciate the lovely rhyme in there. But neuroscience can kind of inform our decision making as teachers, leaders, in schools. And I think it's got a powerful role for kind of bolstering the things we kind of know from psychology, but also kind of leading us down some other avenues as well. So hopefully you'll see that from the talk today. So let's start by having a look at the journey that we're going to take over the next 35 minutes, and hopefully there's a little bit of time for questions at the end. So we're going to have a look at some stuff about memory, some general stuff, forming memories, storing memories, and developing people's understanding. To start with, I think we need a helpful analogy about memory, that if we are teaching and learning leads in our school, we can share it with staff. If we are teachers, then we can just take it on board and use it. And maybe we can communicate it with pupils as well. So a typical way of viewing memory is thinking of it like a library. And I want to explain why that's not a good way to think about memory. So if you think about a library's got lots of books, lots of information stored on shelves. When you take some of that information off the shelf, read through it, you can put it back on the shelf just as you picked it up. You don't change the book at all. When the library shuts for the night, the lights get switched off, everyone goes home, the lights get turned back on in the morning, and the books are all the same. Everything on the shelf looks the same. That's how some people view memory, as like we put information in, it stays there, we can take it out, we can put it back in again, we can go to sleep, and it will all just kind of stay the same. Now, neuroscience shows us that that is not the case. Our memories are actually kind of constantly changing and evolving. So I think we need a better analogy or metaphor for memory. So let's scrap the library. Enter the ecosystem. I think this is a better metaphor for memory, and see if I can convince you. The reason I think it's better is because memories are interconnected. They're connected in this concept that we call schema. Schema is essentially networks of memories. So if you access a piece of information in the network, it affects the other bits of information in the network. It strengthens and weakens the connections. So it's not like the library. We can't just take information off the shelf, put it back intact. Every time we access it, we're changing it. And if you think about an ecosystem, it's connected. All the life forms are connected. If something happens to a particular life form, it affects the other life forms in the ecosystem. So memory is interconnected. Memory is also adaptive. So your brain is constantly wanting to be the most up-to-date that it can be. Neuroscientists kind of agree, like roughly, that the brain is trying to make predictions all the time about what is about to happen. So it's using your knowledge to try to make predictions about what's going to happen. From an evolutionary standpoint, that's really important. We don't want to get caught out and get eaten by a predator or not be able to find a food source or a water source. Making predictions is really important. So it's always wanting to stay up to date so the predictions can be up to date. That means that with your experiences, your brain kind of changes your memories, it adapts and changes to the new environment as it's learning. And that's just like an ecosystem. Life forms in the ecosystem also adapt to changes. The brain is also, memory is also dynamic. I talked about the library. When you shut the lights off, you go home, you come back the next day as the librarian, and everything's just the same, maybe slightly dustier, but it's just the same. That's not what occurs in the brain. When you rest and when you sleep, actually your memories are at work. Things are changing. Your brain is like severing some connections, forming other connections. It's constantly changing. So memory is also dynamic. So hopefully I've persuaded you that we can scrap the kind of storehouse library metaphor of memory, and we can take on board this idea of memory being more like an ecosystem. Memory is also competitive. So this idea of adapting, some memories get strengthened and other memories get weakened so that we can access the ones we need more easily. So through your usage of memory, you kind of sever connections and form stronger connections so that you can access the things that you need regularly, really easily and automatically. Now we've got this big overarching kind of metaphor. Let's start with looking at what neuroscience says about forming memories. Some of this I found absolutely mind-blowing when I was studying it, so I hope you find it just as interesting. Let's take a look at when I was a teacher. I had some questions about my pupils that I just could not understand. So let's start by having a look at a couple of the questions that I had that relate to forming memories. And we're going to see through this section if we can answer these questions. Take a look at our kind of key principle of this section. Ajibel sums it up really nicely. When it comes to forming memories, the most important thing is what the learner already knows. I might refer to this today as their prior knowledge. Our pupils and ourselves, all humans, we don't just wander around the world kind of passively taking in information. We are always using what we already know to try to make sense of the experience that we're having. The most important factor in forming memories is what we already know. Let's illustrate this with a really simple concept. Let's take the concept of a dog, for example. If I ask you to think about a dog, you might think about the dog on the left. It's kind of like slightly bigger dog, looks a bit like a fox. I'm not sure what breed it is. Not great with dogs. Or you might think about a teeny tiny little Chihuahua dog, depending on your experience with dogs. Let's say you have a Chihuahua. You will probably think of a Chihuahua first. If you don't really know very much about dogs, don't really have a lot of connection with dogs, you might think about Scooby-Doo. So we all have like a different kind of sense of what a dog is. We also have a different emotional sense of what a dog is as well. If you're a fan of dogs, you might think about really, really cute little puppies, maybe the Andrex puppies, and they might make you feel really warm and fuzzy inside. If you got bitten by a dog as a child or an adult, you might think that they're kind of like the demons from hell, like this scary looking dog. So everyone's prior conception of even a really simple thing like dogs is at least slightly different, depending on your experience, depending on the emotional kind of value you put on something. Everyone's got at least slightly different conceptions of the same idea. But we have enough of a similar idea of what we mean by dog that we can communicate it. We have like a shared understanding of the concept, even if it's slightly different for each of us. And that's the same with your pupils. When they come in to sit in your lesson, you've got 30 people in front of you who have maybe a vague idea of a concept, but it differs at least slightly amongst all of them. And that means what they understand from what you say is going to at least be slightly different. To understand this further from kind of neuroscience perspective, let's look a little bit more at this concept of a schema, that network of memories. So schemas are networks of related stored knowledge. We all have them, these networks of related stored knowledge. But what I said in the last slide was they're at least slightly different for the same concept. So we've got at least slightly different understandings of the concept of a dog, for example. Something to understand about schemas, just as a caveat, is they aren't literal, they're conceptual. So there's no actual, you can't point to the dog schema in the brain. It's very distributed. So they're just like a concept that we use to talk about memory. Let's see how the quality and the quantity of what's in our schemas affects how our pupils learn. So this is possibly the biggest thing, the kind of biggest like penny drop moment for me when I was reading about forming memories from a neuroscience perspective. We can all sit in the same room and listen to the same information. But because we've all got different prior knowledge, different schemas, we actually see and attend to different things. So even though you're hearing me say the same stuff, you're taking away and attending to different things that I'm saying, depending on what you already know. So the quantity and quality of our schemas affects what we attend to. So it completely affects our experience of the world and what we take in. And there's a really nice study, I've put the little reference at the bottom, Wolf et al., where they studied expert teachers and more novice teachers. And what they did was they showed them still images of a classroom. And they asked the expert and the novice to kind of like have a look at these images. And they were able to track what these teachers were looking at in these images, which bits of the classroom. Even though they were looking at exactly the same images, the novices were looking at things that didn't really matter, like the color of the shoelaces of one of the children who had like shiny shoelaces on. Whereas the expert was looking at things that did matter in the classroom for a teacher. So like the effect of some disruption on other students, for example. So we've got two teachers, different schemas, one that's got more in it, better quality, the expert, one that's got less in it, less high quality, the novice, and they attended to different things. Why does the brain do this? Why does the brain focus us on different things depending on what we know? Well, the brain has learned the stuff that you have experienced and it's stored it, and that takes lots of resource. So it thinks that what you already know, the stuff in the schemas, is really important, it's really precious. It uses this information as a lens to view the world and to make predictions. And it's looking to update what you already know. You've told it that what you know is really important, bank it, store it. It then uses it to view the world and to update what we already know. It's therefore selective. It's using what you already know to selectively update and learn. Oh, sorry. So we're going to see it's a bit of evidence from neuroscience now about how this works in the brain. So I'm going to show you an image, have a read of it, and then I'll explain it. But this is like, I think, mind-blowing stuff. So here's a couple of studies from neuroscience where they took some brain activity, measured brain activity in their participants before they even saw a stimulus. And then they measured the brain activity once they showed them the stimulus. And what they found is that people are laying down these kind of neural scaffolds so that they can capture information when they see the stimulus. So we're always laying down, we're always thinking, we're always laying down this kind of predictive thought about what's going to happen. And then we go into a situation, and then the stuff that relates to what we predicted, we're much more likely to kind of remember. So that's this yellow stuff here. This yellow dot, these yellow dots here were more likely to be remembered because they kind of fit with this neural scaffold that we've laid down. So if you think about what pupils are doing then, if they're listening to you while you're talking and teaching, they're laying down, they're trying to predict what it is that you're going to say next and what you're going to teach them. The stuff that kind of fits with what their prior knowledge and what they've predicted is much more likely to get learned. Those pupils that have got no idea what you're going to say, they've got really weak prior knowledge, are going to find it much harder to form the memories that you want them to form. So not only does it affect what we attend to, but the quality and quantity of our schemas changes how the memory is formed. So what we want for pupils is we want them to take a lot of meaning from what we're saying. We want what we're saying to be really meaningful. But meaning is made when the pupils make a connection between what you're saying and their prior knowledge. They need to make that connection for the memory to be meaningful. If they don't make that connection, even if they can reproduce what you've said verbatim, they haven't learned it meaningfully and it won't stick around. They have to actually construct a connection between what you've said or what they've read, whatever task they're doing, and their prior knowledge. Let's have a look at a quick summary, and then we're going to look at what this might mean for teaching. So let's have a look at what this might mean for teaching. First of all, if you think about what we've just said, your prior knowledge affects what you even see in a situation, what you attend to. So your pupils who lack prior knowledge don't have a clue what's important about what you're saying. Think about how much gets said in a lesson. Like important things, sometimes you go off on a tangent, sometimes you're talking about other stuff from previous lessons. You know, how do they know what's important in this lesson? How do they know what to attend to? Well, the answer is they don't. You think that they understand what's important, but unless you're incredibly explicit about it, they will not take away the things that you want them to, because everybody is attending to different things depending on their prior knowledge. So the first thing we have to do is we must focus pupils' attention. And I don't just mean focus their attention on the speaker. I mean, focus their attention on the important content in the lesson, so they don't focus too much on the kind of peripheral stuff. Make sure, leave no doubt as to what is the most important core knowledge in your lesson. Because they will not pick that up by themselves. Now, we've just said from Azubel's quote that the most important thing that determines how you form memories is what you already know. So that being the case, we have to find out what they already know. I'm kind of steadily in more and more agreement with Dylan William about how important formative assessment is and really grasping what people already know. It's one of the most important things, and investing time and professional development in getting robust methods of trying to figure out what is in the learner's brain, what they already know, what the quality of their schema is, has got to be absolutely fundamental. We also want to make explicit links. I said that memories won't be formed meaningfully unless we connect the material to what they already know, those two puzzle pieces. That means we have to make explicit links. We can't bank on pupils making those links themselves if they're not very knowledgeable about a topic. We have to make sure we tell them exactly what the link is. And we can do this through clever sequencing of curriculum, but we can also do this in the moment when we're teaching. Let's have a look at an example. Here's an example of making explicit links between ideas. Here's a non-example. Take what you've just learned about the brain. In the first example, we've warmed up a network of memories in people's minds. If they're paying attention to us, we've warmed up a network about Romeo and Juliet, about this idea of devotion. We've warmed up those memories. And then we've tried to connect the idea with this idea of patriotism that they've never heard of, or maybe don't have much knowledge of, but has a similar link across it. Obviously, it's different in many ways, but there's a link we can draw. In the non-example, we've done none of that warming up. We've treated patriotism like a whole new thing. They're not really sure what schema to apply. They can't make it meaningful. And it's really hard to make that connection. So we want to be trying to train teachers and as teachers to be continually making these links. Something else we can do, we want pupils to meaningfully process and make those links that I talked about. Let's say I've delivered a 10-minute exposition on something, and I've done lots of questioning, and maybe I'm talking about the water cycle, and we're getting there, and there's an image on the board, and we think we're getting there. You've got 30 people in front of you, 30 people with different prior knowledge. We need them to make the connections themselves. So we can use this idea of rehearsal. We can give them things to do that force them to make the connections between what they already know and what you're teaching them. We can ask them to put things in their own words. Take a moment, put it in your own words before we move on. And then you can circulate and see what their own words look like. You will be shocked. You will know this from when you've done things like this. You'll be shocked about the differences, despite the fact that you gave the same explanation to the whole class. You want them to draw links between what they know and what you've taught them. One way you can do that is you can use concept mapping. There's quite a lot of evidence supporting the idea that concept mapping can be useful if you teach your kind of pupils to do it well, but it enables them to sort of make connections between concepts. It also enables you to see misunderstandings really easily. If they've connected up two things where you're like, those things do not connect, like that's, then you can see quite quickly where the misconceptions are as well. And then finally, once you have taught them something and you have like done a bit of rehearsal, later on in the lesson, you really want to gauge what meaning they've made. And if you think about our concept of dog again, we were all in this range of acceptable meaning, weren't we? We all have the same understanding of dog fundamentally, although it differs slightly in terms of how our emotional response is. What we want to check is that the understanding our pupils have made are within that range of acceptable meaning. They haven't got misconceptions or misunderstandings of what we said. So, answering our questions, why don't pupils grasp what I'm teaching? Why don't all of them get it? Well, they need to link it meaningfully to what they already know, and perhaps they weren't doing that in my lessons. And why do pupils take different meanings from what I've said? Hopefully you know the answer to this now. Everyone's prior knowledge is different, and we view the world through our prior knowledge. We make sense of things through our prior knowledge, and because it's always different, the meaning we make diverges, but we're hoping that we will get pupils' meaning to be within this range of acceptable meaning. Let's have a quick look at storing memories. This is really cool. So when you first form a memory, it's really fragile. When you first form a memory, it's really fragile. It's a fragile trace, easily forgotten. Think about when someone tells you their name when you sit next to them, and like within about 2 seconds, you've forgotten what their name is, unless they have the same name as you, perhaps. You've kind of, it that drops out of your head. When you first get told something, you're first forming a memory, it's really fragile. There's a process it needs to go through to become stable. And that process is called consolidation. So in neuroscience and psychology, we call it memory consolidation. Have a look at this quote about consolidation. Consolidation is the process. If you think about like memories as like building schemas as like building a wall, consolidation is like that brick going on and it's kind of cementing in. So that's what we want for a lot of the stuff we teach our pupils, is we want it to become stable and cemented in. So that's what consolidation is in memory. Let's have a look at how it happens in the brain. We're going to have a look at a simple way that it happens in the brain. So imagine information comes in. So you're standing at the front of the room talking to pupils. Information is entering their minds. It gets processed to start with in an area of the brain called the hippocampus. You might know this as the like seahorse shaped area, if ever you've had a look at brain stuff. It goes into the hippocampus. That's where it's first processed. And remember, it's that really fragile trace. Over time, and it does take time, it gets consolidated, so it gets stabilized in the area of the brain called the neocortex, and that's the outer kind of layer of the brain. So the hippocampus sits like in the middle of the brain, like quite deep, and the neocortex is the outer area. And what happens is the hippocampus, it takes in the information and it kind of replays it to the neocortex. Over time, with a bit of rest, with a bit of sleep, it replays it to the neocortex. and that's called neural replay. Neural replay is kind of the mechanism of consolidation. It's what helps to stabilize the memory trace. I want you to remember that idea of neural replay because it's going to come up later on. And as I said, this mainly happens when you rest. So when you kind of take a bit of a break from studying, maybe your mind is wandering, that's happening unconsciously in the background in your brain. And when you sleep. Let's find out a little bit more about consolidation. It's not an all or nothing process. It's like you don't have a memory trace that's fragile and then suddenly stable. It takes time, and it's kind of a process over time, not just an event. It takes time. And it may never end. So we start to consolidate a memory trace, and then we might access it again and add to it, and then we're consolidating again. So it could just go on forever in this process of reconsolidation. It usually requires rest and sleep. You've heard how important sleep is for our pupils. A lot of memory consolidation, so that stabilization, takes place when they sleep. So what does this mean for you as teachers? We can actually speed up consolidation. So I said consolidation is where memories are stabilized. It's a good thing. We want retention of memory for our pupils. We don't want them forgetting things really easily. So we can speed it up, and I'm calling this catalyzing consolidation. I told you that it takes time, but we can speed that time up. I'm going to show you 2 ways that we can do that. So one way is quite obvious, and you'll get this one quite quickly, which is the more knowledge you have about something, the better your schema is, the quicker consolidation happens. If you know loads about a topic and someone tells you something else about it, you can really easily accommodate that in your brain. So having robust, relevant prior knowledge speeds up the consolidation process. It actually skips out the hippocampus stage and goes straight into our neocortex. So it like catalyzes it. So if you can build pupils' prior knowledge in an area, they will learn faster. Fine. Here's another, I think, slightly more interesting way that we can catalyze consolidation by using retrieval practice. Numerous neuroscience studies have shown us that retrieval, forcing yourself to retrieve information from the brain, actually speeds up consolidation. Something that usually takes rest and sleep can happen far faster if you use retrieval practice. What retrieval practice does is it mimics this mechanism of neural replay. It mimics it in real time without the need for rest and sleep. So retrieval practice done well really can help speed up consolidation. But what do we mean by kind of doing retrieval practice well? Well, let's skip over that for a second. Let's have a look at what we mean by doing retrieval practice well. We need to choose the content that pupils retrieve really carefully. It's a powerful process, retrieval. It speeds up consolidation. We don't have time for them to retrieve everything, so we need to prioritize the important concepts. But we've also found out that retrieval practice speeds up memory stabilization in the brain. So if they retrieve the wrong thing, so if they make an error, they might have consolidated the wrong information. Because retrieval is so powerful, it might strengthen the error. So we must factor in time to eradicate errors that pupils make in retrieval practice by providing feedback that they pay attention to, and possibly giving them another opportunity for correct retrieval. So in summary, Finally, in the last few minutes of this talk, sorry, it's gone on a lot longer than I thought, we'll talk about developing understanding. What do we mean by understanding? What does it mean for our pupils to develop understanding? We could look at what we want them to be able to do. So understanding could be generalizing what you know from one thing to another. It could be understanding concepts and relationships between them. And it could be being able to apply knowledge in different situations. So that could be, these things are all things we want pupils to be able to do. That could be our definition of understanding. Or we could look at understanding as what's kind of happening in the brain. And Efrat first says this. It's about the knowledge that we have and how it's organized. If we've got lots of knowledge and it's organized well in our brains, then we can say we are starting to kind of develop understanding in our pupils. I want us to see understanding like a snowball. Imagine that you start to build the snowball, you're pushing it along the ground, and it's like slowly gathering snow and getting bigger and bigger. Once you get to a certain point, so let's say you're kind of pushing this snowball up a hill, it's getting bigger and bigger. It's quite difficult at first to do it, but eventually when you reach a level of understanding, it becomes suddenly really easy to understand everything else. And that's when you get to the top of the hill and the snowball rolls down itself, gathering more and more snow. So understanding is this process of like gathering more and more knowledge, organizing it, connecting it, and then suddenly you're at this sort of tipping point where you start to be able to understand loads more. Let's take an example of like growing understanding. Have a read of this. So you can start to see that your understanding grows over years of kind of building up information and experiencing things in different ways. I know I'm about to run over time, so I just want to show you a couple more slides about how to build understanding in pupils, and then we'll leave it there. So the way that we want to build understanding is by getting pupils to organize their knowledge. And Azubel talks about knowledge as being hierarchically organized. So if we look at vertebrates, for example, we've got this concept of vertebrates, and then we've got all these examples of different vertebrates, and then specific examples of mammals. We can help pupils to organize their knowledge by using something called an advanced organizer. So before you teach them something, you can give them a kind of concept map of the area they're about to learn. Let's have a look at an example. Here's one that Goodwin, who works at Ollie Cav and does some beautiful work, created based on Helen Reynolds' work. You can have a look at this on his blog, but essentially it's a sort of concept map-ish of physics. And we can provide pupils with like sections of this and show them this before we then teach them the content. And this can help to organize their knowledge and build understanding in an efficient way. So I'll leave it there. Leave you the summary on the slide. But thank you so much for coming to the talk. And I'm sorry that I've gone over a little bit. I hope it was useful to learn about forming memories, storing memories, and developing understanding. Thank you. Thanks so much. Sorry, it was a bit of a rush at the end.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think if people don't mind eating into the break a little bit, we can have a couple of questions.
Yeah,
if
sure.
you want to rush off and go to the loo, that's fine also. Yep.
I don't know if you can hear me, Peter. Timetabling, we only see a class once a week. That's a real challenge in terms of those fragile memories and consolidation. Any thoughts on what can be done about that, if anything?
Yeah, great. That's a really, really good question, and a difficult one. I think first instance is like focus on the things we talked about with forming memories, particularly the rehearsal for meaningful processing. Sometimes we think we've got that idea of I taught it, they learned it. Unless they've meaningfully processed it, the forming of memories drops off really quickly and the forgetting happens really quickly. Your pupils are much less likely to forget if they've had a chance to connect in the lesson and you're confident that they've made those connections. So that's the first thing. The second thing, lots of people are saying this right now, and I think it's a really great point about homework. Using homework as a way to consolidate what they've already learned rather than try to extend what they've learned. I appreciate that these things are kind of like eating into the, you might need homework to use it to kind of extend what they've done because you want to cover your whole curriculum, and that's difficult. But where possible, if you can use homework to consolidate, so get them to retrieve what you've taught them, that will really help as well, I think.
Hi, Sarah. In terms of CPD and teacher training, how do we draw and make explicit links for our novice teachers so that they're made aware explicitly of what they should be drawn attention to?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a fantastic question. So we've got to remember that novice teachers don't come into our schools as blank slates. They've all had teaching experience as students. So they've all got a mental model of the type of teacher they want to be. So we have to kind of find out what that mental model is, find out what they kind of think great teaching is, because we need to like build off of that and change, maybe sometimes like change that mental model. So the first thing is like find out, even though they seem like a novice, they don't really know very much, they do have a conception of teaching. So find out what that is, because it will come to bite you down the line if you find out that they actually don't believe in behavior management or something like that. How do you build their knowledge? Well, a big mistake that I used to make is I used to send novice teachers to watch expert teachers teach. Hopefully you can now see that that's kind of a bit of a difficult thing for them to do because they don't know what to attend to. So if you're going to try to build their model of mental model of teaching through showing them video content or having them observe their mentor, you need someone to go in with them. You need to have a focus and you need to point out what the mentor is doing, or they won't attend to the right stuff. So that's another kind of thing. And then the best thing to do if you're trying to kind of teach novices anything, as you probably know, is to break it down, teach it really explicitly, model it to them and get them to practice it. So that would be my advice.